Sheila here with Sirius Dallas Moon, and I want to talk about the Hammurabi Codex. And this is from Babylon. And let's talk about the fall of Babylon, because we are now, if we think about the global Western conglomerate falling into sovereign social medias, sovereign credit card companies, which also is reconnection with the sovereign languages. We are thinking about the fall of the Tower of Babel. And the first channel that I had in my Spirit of Matter channel was the Tower of Babylon, and how the different cultures have variation on the canon. Now, here is the thing. If the canon is rapey, the tower falls. 9/11 on human trade is 9/11. Also on the religions, on the esoterics, on the occults, on the languages. And now I'm going to sound like those clergy that from the ritual abuse that they went to begin to say, exactly. So the fall of the entire thing. Now, Hammurabi's laws were Babylonian codex, law codex that was on the basis of an eye for an eye. Let's say, I don't know, somebody stole something, I don't know, if I accidentally went on the road and somebody ran into me. Now, my codex is, hey, I'm sorry, and moving on. Me being the person that they ran into. uh, Now, according to the Babylonian law, I would have to pretend that I'm running into them by mistake, and then it's an eye for an eye. Now, where does an eye for an eye stem from? When people don't want to tackle the abolishing of the rape of infants. Jurisdiction was created within a context, a religious spiritual context. So before, for example, if I want to be, let's say, your judge and your community, before you will accept me and my laws, you would accept my food before you would accept my laws, right? Makes sense. You would accept my medicine before you would accept my laws. Now, if I showed you, this is the element, this is the cultural practice, the esoteric practice, the religious practice that you are practicing that result in that element. And here are some of you that abolished this practice, and look, they have recovered. This is what Jesus did, by the way. But any religion, Islam, and so on and so forth. And then you say, okay, if we go by these practices, we will not have ailment. What else do you have to teach us? And then if I tell you, listen, if you go by these practices, not only you will have curation from ailments you thought that you couldn't cure, but also you will not have famine so much, in as much as your region is connected to it, which means that you are, the more we expand this practice, then the less famine is. Now, let's say you practice this practice, and indeed, you see good years, or even within famine, or even within this, your populi or your people have the right herbs, the right, and then you say, okay, well, this person, what they say, they cure ailments we thought it's impossible to cure. This ailment stemming from the practices of the people, and then this food, amazing. Now, if I say to you from this point, let's reinstate it as a law that these practices are tradition, and by this tradition we judge. You say, okay, this is interesting. But now I begin to say to you, now let's think. If a person violated these practices, what do we want them to do? To return to these practices. Okay, we're not seeking to punish them. We're also not seeking to reform them. We're not seeking to act against them, and we're not seeking to avenge them. What are we seeking? Lady Justice, Libra, the creation of harmony within society so that there will be food. This is where Libra trines Gemini and Aquarius. And people will have home, and we will be in around about the temperature where our nervous system is healthy. One such practice I can tell you is to abolish rape. Now, when I say to abolish rape, even in self-pleasure, even when it comes to the infant, even when it comes to cultistic practices, anything that enables rape, for that to be abolished, and the more we practice that, all of these things exist. So if somebody, let's say, rape, what do we want? We say, how was rape created? Well, usually by the person being raped. Usually at the phase where they don't even know good or bad. And this tells us already of how we can begin to take a look at the phenomenon on a cultural level. Now, first and foremost, we need to get what was secret when the helpless was in a situation where that was secret, so that they will be supported when they speak. But not to force them to speak. So let's say if somebody, let's say, was raped, the solution is not to rape them because they were already raped. And this is where an eye for an eye falls, and this is also where the Tower of Babel fell. And by the way, when I looked at the sovereigning up of Europe from United States, and the psychoerotic no longer being compliant with Epstein esoterics, at least as far as it came to me, I never complied with that, but and then we see the collapsing of a certain structure. That, by the way, people had premonitions to at least a year backwards. They saw the organization as a certain kind of like an elongated bridge that has kind of like a sick bed that somebody was holding onto, where everything seemed to be shaky and falling, but the bed stops being sick when we abolish what? Rape of infants. And then the structure that is built can be sovereign. This pertains also to the Babylonian Empire. Now, indeed, yes, the Babylonians, when they were conquering, they were studying from the costumes of the locals. But if all the locals still had rapey costumes, as long as that was not abolished, they could glorify rape. They could say that they're honoring of the feminine, okay, what they call the whore of Babylon. The whore of Babylon is glorification of rape, because the whore of Babylon was a trafficked infant that was raped as infant, and then they glorified basically continuation of trafficking and rape. Entire Babylon fell. And they had the mathematics, and they had the astrology, and they had everything. But on rape foundation, what we built on rape, it could be as much as the Tower of Babylon. Of course, all the cultures are variations on the canon, but when the canon is rapey, it's 9/11. But this is not 9/11 like the Trade Centers. It's 9/11 on a global scale. Half of China is dead, half of US is dead. A Tower of Babel that is built on rape falls. It will not manage to have. Now, towards 2030, the thought about one world religion, one world government, one world this, the only thing that can unify the world is zero rape. Anything else is not only is foundation only to destruction on a global scale. That will not accept anyone that was built in on these foundations. And look at this beautiful sun squaring Pluto on the degree. But throughout this day, it would also square on the minute. And then Uranus will move to conjoin Sedna in Gemini. So going back to the codex, the law, an eye for an eye is not basis because it is attempting to balance without abolishing rape. Without abolishing rape, we can balance nothing. Don't ask me. Don't ask me. Try to cash in on your life insurance. Try to cash in on your 401k. Try to cash in on your stocks today. Don't ask me. Try to cash in on your investment property. Now, if you cashed in on your investment property and you sold it to a private equity, you have sold it to whom? To your perpetrators. When I wrote in 2017, an eye for an eye makes the world go blind, now, I want to talk about beta per se in the word retaliation. Beta per se, what is called retaliation, is not an eye for an eye. Is turning into stone those who put beta per se in a situation of beta per se, namely those who raped and blame shifted. It's the feminine rage that turns into stone sex offenders. It's because its purpose is one and only, not to torture, not to rape, to turn into stone, to end all rape practices. This is what the meaning of the word retaliation in context of beta per se is. Not eye for an eye. Eye for an eye is laziness in codex that persists the judges that rape the children and tries to balance the world anyway with rape. That's the teeter-tatter. Remember what I was talking about, the teeter-tatter? If a beta per se, if the life energy of beta per se is not completely restored, and this is to the prenatal phase even. For some people, it means that they first incarnate in the body as a soul and body, honored as the erotic, non-erotic self. This is what sanity is. This is why whenever, even if I was naming name, I would say, again, for these people were very likely tortured. And still the pattern has to discontinue. They cannot continue to rape. Whether it's from them or from whoever tortured them, or I don't know. Now, if it's technology, then they classify the technology. Um, if there is something what happening in temples or in this or above ground, below ground, all of this must be abolished. All of these rapes must be abolished. And it's not a teeter-tatter. Because the people that go above ground, they will not be able to live if these things are not abolished. Okay, when we're talking about moving towards 2030, towards a one world government, one world religion, and Uranus and Gemini also try to unify the duplicities. On the basis of what were civil wars won? Human rights. Who appeased human rights the best? But if the abolitionists were salvation by rape and torture, then this is why abolitionist movement failed, because it was interlinked with ritual abuse of infants and people. Abolishing slavery is not what the abolitionists did, and again, they would have to abolish rape also on an occultistic rape, also on astral, on every level. They can. This is the foundations. They cannot build on rapey foundations, whether these rapey foundations visible or invisible. When I was living in Arad and going towards the people that were not by what they wanted, living in a hostel, and I said, but these people, they can clean better than me, yet they have to live with a roommate, and this creates. And I said, well, it's their money. And were medicated with things that cause side effects and so on. I said, wait a second, they have rights that they deserve assistance with private sector housing. And then I was raped in my private sector housing as tenant. Using for the invisible, which is MK often. If I was not astrologer, I wouldn't even know what it is. And yet the people that went through that, they would seek to name that. And they would find it only in the esoterics, only in the occult, only what they call spiritual welfare. I said, what is spiritual welfare? Oh, they meant spiritual rape. Wait a second. I was coining the term spiritual rape at around 2007, 2008 at the subprime crisis, when I was trying to address what is this issue and how can I have different experiences, in the sense that what I can curate from that, or the what is it, or how does a person heal from that. And people wished me to be raped, and then I went for astral rape by group. Where the term that I coined was the most accurate one, spiritual rape. That's what it was. As I said, soul rape. It is exactly, that's the thing. That's the thing. That's the Inquisition. They tried to create misplaced arousal, and I said, no, there's something missing here. Because I said something missing here, and I wasn't going to the teeter-tatter as expected, then but I was targeted. If I agreed to accept upon myself a tag of cuckoo, then I would get funding for studies, as long as I was in debt, which of course, with the prescribed stuff, would create. The minute I began to challenge the impossible, both academically, in research, and in my own personal life, promoting awareness that even in self-pleasure, when it comes to the readiness and the endocrine system, whether it's yeast or whatnot, and then the peak war began also that again around 2019 and then 2020 with around another, not the subprime crisis, this time the supposed death of Epstein, and the sparking of ritual abuse discussions that could no longer be dismissed as satanic panic. Now, if in the Talmud it is okay to rape an infant, and it's not an issue of misunderstanding because they could have phrased themselves better. In fact, the only reason that they would have challenges to communicate their message correctly would be if they went themselves through rape, which probably they did. And they would use that for the esoteric practices. Like I said, Sol squares Pluto, royal degree, and it's the notion of the king as a representation of God, but this God, people talk about the demiurge, it's not about demiurge or not demiurge, is if there is occultistic rape in the esoterics, if it is practice of occultistic rape, if it's practice of rape, then it is this false God, false king, whether it's monarchy or democracy. Because we saw these things happening in democracy as well. Okay, but as an astrologer that covered certain elections, I can tell you these things happen also in democracies. Now, the antidote is honoring the feminine. And honoring the feminine means not blame shifting when around, not to rape and not to blame shift around this rape, which is the better persist stories. And by that we also mean sovereignty. Sovereignty is antidote to slavery, because to try to enslave a person, to say, oh, how can I use this person, is antithetical to sovereignty. The union of people can only happen with zero rape. And around things that each and every sovereign agrees to and is informed by. That which violates that eventually builds on shaky ground. By the way, will there be an earthquake upon the Uranus ingress from Taurus? I predict that there can be some last releases And because Uranus is going to conjoin Sedna, particularly areas around where there is oil and gas refineries or drilling. I am sitting in between those. um, and Sun in Taurus releasing from the square to Pluto might conjoining with Uranus ingressing to Gemini, conjoining Sedna, Mercury in Aries. It can be even as a result of bombing, but a release of toxins. I know that there was a bombing of Hormuz, which we saw upon the perfection of this aspect, which is probably an ecological disaster. It is going to affect the waters as planned, what like they say, as planned. But we won't be able to have fresh water. Even the water that will be sold to us will not be fresh and will be toxic. They will have neurotoxins unless we abolish ritual abuse. Because the origin of the decisions was by deriving the power from occultistic rape of infants or occultistic rape or any sort of rape. This is why in 2007, in the beginning, at first when I spoke up, people thought that I'm looking for money. And I said, what does she want? How much money does she want? And so on and so forth. They actually took the satire that I referred to. I referred to, what was it? This Israeli satire. And then they took the same satire and they said, well, how much money does she want? I was on the same skit, but here is the point. I said, well, no. No matter how much money, what I need is for that to change. And then I would learn that this is occultistic rape that is done to hoard money. For example, there was a YouTuber that was sued for $15 million or something like that. I said that's probably the money that they made on selling unsolicited photos of her or something like that when she was assaulted or raped. And so, but how much would it take for it not to be economic to do occultistic rape? Uranus in Gemini conjoining Sedna is the numerics of that in spirit and in matter. How much does it take to understand that we cannot trade sex and we cannot trade children and we cannot trade humans? The only authentic connection with community or unionizing or whatnot can only be with abolition of rape and ritual rape. This is why I stopped when I said the Huguenot women needed to change the scriptures. Because those scriptures were used in esoterics and they could have lived their life not really feeling anything about their life until they do. Or not connecting the dots between, let's say, problems they had at the workplace and the patriarchal misogynic approach that, let's say, dictated certain policies. Is it like, oh, these rules just seems to, for example, why can't a barista have a chair? It seems like a stupid rule. But the stupid rule comes from energy siphoning of the employees in a structure that was meant to have them dedicating their time to something that will not pay attention to what is going on. A sitting person is more of a thinking person than a perpetually standing person. A person that can both sit and stand or sit and walk around is a perpetually, systematically nervous system regulated person, which is very risky to child rapists that derive on the entire world being stupid and enslaved. so that they won't have to deal with the origin wound, but they were raped when they were infants. Now, when it comes to the occult, any practice of occult that is not founded on zero rape, zero slavery, zero energy siphoning will compoundly collapse until we have foundation with zero rape, zero slavery, zero energy siphoning.